So did you start off teaching children?
The first learners that I worked with, the very first class I ever taught, they were 5 years old. And then over the next 5 to 6 years, like I was teaching primary, middle school kids, secondary school kids. Suddenly I was also teaching university students. At some point I then went and taught in corporate contexts, for learners anywhere up to about 60 years of age. So you get a really great sense of what works for human beings in general when you get that sort of scope of education experience.
Is there a difference between teaching children and maybe the openness of an adult learner?
I don't think it's so much a matter of openness, but the doors you need to find and open are different. You've got to have a great relationship with kids in order to be able to teach them. They will, if they decide they don't like you or that they don't enjoy being in your classroom, it's very hard to teach them anything. So that relationship building is really critical with kids. But with adults, there needs to be, you really do need to know the difference between pedagogy and andragogy. There are differences. And with adults, they need to get a bit more of a sense that you respect things they already know, that you respect the fact that they can already learn things, and that they might want to contribute a lot more to the process of learning something. Mm-hmm. Whereas with kids, they'll come to you and they're like, well, I'm up for everything, as long as you're a good person to be in the room with.
So when it comes to designing learning, is there anything that you look for or want to, have in the programs that are specific to schools?
As I said, with the spread of experience and age groups I've worked with, it's been a fantastic journey to work out what works in a universal sense. So, that whole social constructivist approach to the learning, I think is become very foundational to me, and we certainly drive that very hard in the NESLI programs. That idea that the learners are there to co-construct the learning, both with the teacher or the expert and each other. I honestly feel there needs to be a sequence of connecting to what it is you're about to learn. Your previous experience, your previous knowledge, the things that interest you, the things you may have had experience with in the past. From there, you've got to really go into a place where you have access to content and knowledge and ideas. But you want to be able to explore that. It's not a matter of absorbing it or sitting back and having it poured into you. You need to get a sense of, right, I'm going to explore a bit of a landscape of ideas and concepts that might be new to me here. And from there, you want to go to what I call investigation. And that is, you really want to start digging deeper, and you want to try things out, and you want to test ideas out with other people. Now, when you've used a connection at the beginning, you have connected to the real world via the learners themselves. And then if the final stage of that modular journey is to go out and apply it in some way, so that you can not just apply it and see it in action in the real world, but also reflect on that and also work towards some sort of accommodation of the new learning. My worldview was this, I now know this, I've tried this, and I've seen it in the real world like this, so what do I think now? How am I accommodating that new exposure?
At NESLI, we use like a blended learning. And was that always the case?
I would differentiate between, 3 modes. One is, I wouldn't even call it face-to-face, to be honest, and I've written articles about this, that in a physical location, learning, blended learning where you'll have a mix of being in a physical location and doing something in an online setting, and fully online. Yes. And in the NESLI space, some of it's blended, but a lot of it's fully online, but given that they take it back out into the workplace and do things in the workplace, to some degree, maybe you could say it's still blended. I mentioned before that I didn't use the word face-to-face, because now in our online settings, it's highly face-to-face, through the synchronous video-based live learning that we do. So I wouldn't even say face-to-face versus online. To me, that's a false dichotomy. Which I really hope everyone grows out of, because the technology allows us to be very face-to-face now.
With the webinars that we use, is there any particular reason why you wanted to implement that?
I've actually been waiting about a decade for the technology to catch up. I think I've been looking to do live synchronous video-based learning since about 2002. And we've only in the last 3 or 4 years got to the point where these platforms like Zoom and others can create a very fluid, natural environment where you can see each other, you can see each other's expressions, you can interact with each other. But to me, that's what sets genuinely great online learning apart from the bad online learning, which is the PDF dump with a couple of quizzes. As human beings, we are social creatures. As human beings, we are communicators. And I believe that, we're learning something right now because we're having a conversation. And the more people we bring into that conversation, if it's done the right way, the more everyone in that conversation has the potential to learn something.
What ways do you assess the learning that's happening in the online portal and in the webinars?
Assessment to me is really about constructive alignment between, what are the objectives, what are we setting out to learn here? What do we want to achieve from doing this? Why are we here? What are we doing? To how are we going to assess, the learner's ability to now do that or know that? And then the learning material. So there's got to be constructive alignment in that triangle between the objectives, the learning materials or processes, and the way we assess. So that to me is always the beginning question, because they'll often point to what the assessment should be. In my earlier days of assessment, it was about great quizzes and great assignments and stuff like that. Now it's more about artifacts, and by an artifact I mean something tangible that you can now use in the real world, or you can now apply in the real world. And that to me is the best way to assess whether this learning's had some sort of impact and had developed some sort of capability.
Is there any particular way that you go about evaluating your, first of all, facilitation and your impact?
I would differentiate between what I would call a process evaluation versus an impact evaluation. In all honesty, when I hear people talk about impact evaluation now, I usually shiver a little bit, because we've become a world and a system that is obsessed with measurement, not always for the right reasons. That said, I think you've got to, the key question is to ask yourself why. Why am I evaluating? And I mean, one of the things we do is we ask them to self-assess as well as assess us and the program. So we've got, 10 different dimensions there within the self-assessment and the program assessment. But then we'll also look at the interaction in the webinars, and we'll look at what I call interactional analytics. We now measure at 5-minute increments what's going on in that session. Who's talking to who? Is the teacher talking to everybody? Are participants talking to each other? Are participants bringing in new subject matter? So we measure all that. And we do it for every single webinar, and we do sometimes 90 webinars a week. So you can see we've got a huge amount of data over time. But the key thing is you've got to set this up in a way that you're going to generate and catch all those forms of data.